All right, so this is the class on creating your backup workflow. By the end of this class, you will have at least an idea of what of your backup workflow are, and also you will be able to design your own workflow, your own backup system by the end of this class. Now, there is definitely a lot to talk about when we talk about backing up, and how do you make sure the photographs that you have taken are safe. How do you do that? So there is certainly that element here, and I think in this next hour we'll get into the details of that. I think I'm watching the feedback here, and looks like you are able to see all the screens are okay. Let me go back to the video here, just say hello, and then we'll get started. Okay. All right, there we go. So once again, thank you for joining this class on creating your own backup workflow. In this next hour, stick with me. We are going to go into a lot of details. I'm going to give you specifically by the end of 60 minutes, next 60 minutes, how you can create your own workflow, own backup plan, so that you're not losing your photos. As I'm going to talk here, one of the very shocking and surprising thing of photography and photographers who have businesses is that they don't have a consistent and a clearly defined workflow that takes their photos and backs it on an ongoing basis. So here in the next hour, that's what I'm going to show you. I will show you three things. One, specific elements that you need in your backup plan. Two, I'm going to show you how you can design your own workflow, and I'm going to give you in this space, give you three different options, three different levels that you can choose. And last, third thing, I'm going to tell you specifically what steps you should take if you don't have a backup right now. If you don't have a plan to back up your food photos or your photos in general, how do you go about doing that? So I'll give you a step by step. If you never had a backup, what do you do? If you have a certain backup but that's not consistent, how do you make it consistent? All of that we'll talk about here. So that's what you should expect in next 60 minutes. Let me go back to the course material, class material, and we'll get started. All right, so go ahead and let me tell you specifically once again, what are you going to learn in the next 60 minutes? So one, I'm going to show you three fun ways to lose your photographs, destroy your trust among your clients, and how do you shut down your own business. So three fun ways to do that. Then we're going to talk about simplifying the technical portion, the technology. It's very confusing. Sometimes it can be intimidating to how do you even go about it and starting, how do I even start my own backup plan. So we'll talk about that here as well. Then we'll go to what are the three different levels of backup, depending on where you are in your photography career. what kind of level should you go with? I'm going to talk about that. Then we'll get down into the elements of your workflow and specifically backing up your photos. This is such an important aspect, this backing up question, and I'm really surprised so few people have a plan. So few people think about this seriously. And then last thing is, I'll give you a roadmap to implement this whole aspect of backing up your photographs in your own business. Now, before we do that, let me quickly introduce myself. I've been uh, photographing food since 2005, so that's 12, 13 years now. And uh, I've been into situations, embarrassingly enough, one, at least, well, more than one, two or so situations where I did lose a lot of photographs. And that's why I say that it's a surefire way to destroy your business and kill the trust that your clients have in you. Not a fun position to be in, not a fun place to be in if you're struggling or if you're even trying to get your own business going, or even if you have a business that is sustaining. If you have not had a backup plan, you're basically planning to fail. There's no way of putting that across, and that's where this this aspect of 3 fun ways to lose your photos, destroy trust, and shut down your business. This comes up because if you don't have a backup plan, you are basically waiting for the disaster to happen. And I don't want to sound like an insurance agent, who's trying to sell you the insurance and giving you stuff that trying to talk. I mean, I'm sure you've talked to an insurance agent, and it's not a very pretty conversation. Here, it's a similar kind of conversation, similar kind of thought process, in a way that until this happens to you, you won't realize how important this is. And once it happens to you, you are too late to do anything about it. So this was also in news a couple of months ago, maybe maybe a year ago as well, that there was a wedding photographer who got sued by the client for X number of thousands of dollars, because his because his whole system crashed. His whole So they lost wedding photos for the client. The client sued this photographer, and the end of the day, the reason why it happened was this wedding photographer did not have a backup system, and he was running on a system that there was no redundancies, no duplications, none of that. And so that's really a great way to lose your entire business. So you've, I'm sure, thought about insuring your business, or having an insurance on it. Unless you have a backup plan, unless you have a workflow that is very much embedded in what you do for your business, or even if you have a blog, if you have your own food company, if you don't have a consistent and an ongoing workflow for backing up your photos, you're basically just waiting for failure. So what are these 3 fun ways? Well, way number 1 is to ignore the obvious. So what is the obvious? Well, the obvious thing here is hard disks and storage systems are going to fail. They may not have failed 1 year in their life, 2 years in their life, 10 years in their life, but they are going to fail. So if that obvious aspect of technology is something that you would like to ignore, that's way number one. You can be ready to destroy your business. Way number two is having a random workflow. What do I mean by workflow? I'm going to talk about that in next few minutes. But specifically here, just to get this going, workflow is a process. And if you don't have a structured process that once you capture the images, what happens to them, if you don't have that, you're almost certain that one point of time you will lose copying some images from one place to the other, and you're increasing your likelihood of failure. So that's the second way. Now, the third way is kind of what we just talked about, to wait and panic. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, if you don't want to back up, you can just wait there until the hard disk fails and then panic. So I was telling you an incident, I hinted to an incident that happened to me about now 4 or 5, well, actually more than that, 2008 timeframe. And in those days, uh, the hard disks were not that common, but still they were common. And what I did, I had one hard disk that was where I used to back up all my photos from my laptop, from my machines to my a hard disk. I think it was a Western Digital hard disk. It was, they used to be the big ones that, I mean, 10 pound or so, probably not, but a pretty heavy hard disk, external hard disk. And I used to put all these photos in there. And one day, as I was trying to plug that in, it just never started. And that hard disk had about 2 years worth of photographs that I stored in there. So even as I think about that, kind of breaks my heart that I lost about 2 years worth of work um, in that hard disk. So that was a lesson for me. I learned a lesson, and then I created a workflow that I think is not perfect, but removes all of those three ways to destroy your business. Now, to the next couple of minutes, I want to go into some technical jargons, and I'm going to talk about what is the ins and outs of this whole backup, what are some words, and then I'm going to go into the actual equipment that we will be using in our next section. So let's talk in tech jargon. So what do I mean by backup? I mean, at the end of the day, the very basic definition of backup is copying your photos to more than one location, more than one media. That's it. That's what we are talking about. And it could be that you could move those from, or copy those in 2 or 3 or 4 different places. You could, but it's more than one. That's what's important. And it could be external hard drive or one of the other storage types that we will talk about here in a few seconds. It could be any of that, but that's what we mean by backup. Now, what do I mean by workflow? And workflow is really the flow, or really start to finish, your photograph's journey. How does a photograph start from capturing it all the way to archiving it? What is that journey? That's what we will talk about. So let's get into now some of the different types of storage units. And once we go into this, I'm going to then jump into Really, I'm going to start. I'm going to jump into the actual how do you connect all of these different storage units, and how do you really go about doing that. Um, so let's next get into uh, SD cards, and really SD cards are, you know, several different types. You put them in the place you use them. So these are really the place of capture, flow, or life of photograph. These happen in the capture stage. We use them in the capture stage. Then are the hard drives, and you've seen these external hard drives. Typically, three different types that I have there. That's this one is a Seagate hard drive. Then you have, I think this is a Western Digital. I think it's called a book. And then this is Lattice, I believe that's what it's called. Kinds of hard drives that you can use to store your photographs. So that's another storage type. Then you have NAS, and NAS is network assisted storage. The two more common ones, Synology and then QNAP, both of them make NAS. And really, at the end of the day, what this is, there are different quote unquote bays or places where you can put an internal hard drive in the system. And this system then stores it, replicates it, creates a mirror image depending on what configuration, what setting you choose. And then you can connect this to the internet. In other words, this is your own personal cloud. That's what this ends up being. The next type of storage. Now then, there are the cloud-based storages, and you've heard about, of course, I'm sure, Google Drive, or this is Dropbox. So both of them are pretty popular. But in photography world, we also have Backblaze, Carbonite, CrashPlan. The disadvantage of going with the storages is that you have to pay on a monthly basis, or on a, so you have to pay for these services on an ongoing basis. So that's what the storages, online storages are. And then really the last piece, common last piece, are the servers. And servers are nothing but multiple hard drives connected to a system that is pretty powerful. So it's kind of similar to the NAS that we talked about, but slightly different still. That this is a higher capacity, mostly used for production houses and such. All right. So far we have talked about the technical jargons. Before that, we talked about three amazing ways to shut down your business. And then the next thing we'll talk about is we'll start getting into designing the workflow. Now, specifically here, I want you to think about, before getting into that, I want you to think about the life of a photograph. And we'll talk about the life of a photograph because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that your photograph is safe and secure throughout its life. So I'll get into the details, and I think this will make more sense. So what happens if you think about a life of a photograph? So the very first thing, that's how the photograph is born, is when you capture the photograph. And what happens at the capture? The information is stored in an SD card. This could also be on a phone or DSLRs. That's where the capture happens. So then what? So once the capture happens, the photo then is transferred to um, either a computer or a hard disk. and that capture, the transfer of the raw photograph happens in one of those locations. Then you start editing the photograph, and at the end of this, you edit the photograph uh, in the Lightroom or a similar post-processing software, which then takes the photograph to where the photograph then goes to archive, or it is exported, it is saved, it's ready to be shared, and that's what happens in an archive process. The photograph is archived, the quote-unquote life of the photograph stops there. Life of the photograph essentially, now the photograph is complete, it's quote-unquote an adult, and it's ready to go in the world and make some noise. So what is our goal? Our goal is to save the photograph at each of these stages. And to do that, there are several different aspects to keep in mind. There are several different things to keep in mind. And that's what now we'll talk about in our next aspect, next discussion. Um, as we're closing this section, as we're closing the fact that why is it important to save your photograph in each of these stages? Well, if you think about it, even though you're here in the capture stage, you're in front of your food photo or in front of your food subject, and you're trying to capture an image. You capture the image and your SD card may be corrupt. So how do you save that? How do you save that? Same thing can happen when the photograph is being edited. So how do you go about saving in that stage? And once it is completed, of course, that's where the backup typically is more talked about. But in all of these stages, capture all the way to process, this is also a place where you do need to save that photograph. So that's what we'll talk now in the next section, which is so far we've talked about several different elements of we've talked about the life of the photograph. We've talked about several different up here we talked about several different technology storage units. I'm going to share what my workflow is, and then we'll get into different levels of workflows. So I'll use mine as an example. So as an example, what we just talked about, here we said that we need to make sure that we are able to save the photograph in each of these stages. And now we'll go into one example, and I'm going to use my example, how my workflow works, how I do the backup, and then we can talk about we'll talk about specifics of different kind of aspects. Okay, so getting into the step number one, or stage one, really. Stage one is when the capture happens. So so think about this, I'm at an assignment, I'm trying to capture photographs. The first place to save or have a backup is to use two SD cards. Some cameras now do have dual SD card slots. This camera, I think most of the professional cameras now do have that. So that is the first step in starting the journey and starting to save your photograph. As I said, there are definitely cases where, or rather a risk, where you are capturing the photograph and at the end of the session, As you pull out the camera, as you pull out the SD card, you plug it in to your laptop, what you find is, well, the SD card is corrupted. Well, so in that situation, what are you going to do? You have just spent all this money, all this time, all this energy on paying for a food stylist if you do that, or paying for food if you're doing your own photography. How are you going to save that? And then so that's where this dual SD card really works really well. My process is I use this, I capture in both as a dual, in the dual mode. Then I go and offload that SD card and have that raw images copied in both of those HD drives. So those are external hard drives. I copy those. I think mine is latest one is 1 TB, and those two 1 TB hard drives have these images now. So now I've designated one of my hard drives as a working drive, and that working drive then connects with the computer. And this is where I'll bring up Lightroom, typically not so much Photoshop, more Lightroom, and I will work directly off of this hard drive. This hard drive, once again, is next to my machine. It's now as I'm working through this, it will now be linked through the machine, and this way my image from this SD card is now being edited, not directly, but through this external drive. Once I have the images here in the both of these places, I will typically format the SD cards. And some people, keep the SD cards as well as a third backup, but I just format them, and then they go back in the camera for the next photo shoot. If you come back to the Lightroom now, as I'm working on Lightroom and editing the photographs that are actually located here, Lightroom files are getting changed. In other words, the Lightroom catalog is changing. And what I will do at the end of the session, at the end of the editing session, is I'm going to these this catalog also in this hard drive. So these two hard drives not just have my, but at the same time, these already have all my working documents, all my excuse me, edited stuff, all my Lightroom catalog, that's on here as well. Then once I've finished the session, typically the same day I will update the hard drive too. Now there are some automation or automated programs that also help you do that. If you don't have that, you can just do this manually. That's what I do from time to time. I manually update these two hard drives. So next then, in my workflow is really, let's see here. I then also would sync my working hard drive to the NAS and the network assisted storage. I do that as well. I use that, and I have then synced as well. So now 1, 2, and 3, these three things, three storages have a very much synced information, synced data, synced photographs. So I have now 3 copies of the same data. So why is it important? Well, how do I use NAS? The reason I use NAS is it first of all adds another layer of backup, another layer of redundancy to my photographs. Now here, back in this stage, if you noticed, and you probably caught this already, As I am updating my hard disk with the latest and greatest as we're working through this. After the session, now I have a disconnect here, right? I have this set of files that are now edited. This set are not edited. Now, because I shoot and draw, all I need is really a Lightroom catalog to make sure all my changes are saved. So this now is synced with this, where typical change is the Lightroom catalog, which is not that big. So then, once I've done this, this is where the archiving happens. Now I have archived my images here as three different places. And what that helps me do then is, on an ongoing basis, as I'm needing or as I need to access the computer, I can connect directly to NAS, connect directly to hard drive as well. If I need to open, if I'm trying to make any portfolio, any proposal, that just helps me do that. And at the same time, with on internet, on the cloud, this becomes my personal cloud as well. And on my phone, I can now show my photographs that are at one place in my home. So now I've given you one example of the workflow. Now we will start talking about how do you design your strategy. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water and go back. All right, so now let's talk about your backup strategy. How do you design that? How do you go about changing the elements? And to do that, I want to talk about this concept of 3-2-1. It's a well-known backup quote-unquote strategy that is used. It's a well-known acronym, a 3-2-1. And what we mean by that is that there should be always 3 different copies in 2 different media types to be offsite. So let's break that down. If in this case I have 3 different copies, do I have those? So copy number 1, copy number 2, copy number 3. Do I have 2 different media types? So this is media type number 1, which is hard drive, and this is media type number 2, which is NAS. So I have that too. Now what about offline? Do I have something offline? So in this case, I do not have something offline that I consistently or ongoing basis update. So that is definitely one piece that is missing in my workflow that I plan to bridge in the coming weeks. So once again, 3-2-1 is you need 3 different copies of 2 different media types, and one of them should be offline or offsite. It could be at a friend's place, at family's place, any place else. The offsite could also constitute to an online type service. The only my issue with online services, one, the cost is by month. In some cases, it's like by how much you store as well. So that I don't like that piece. And then the second piece is making sure that the privacy of your image, you're not giving away your legal rights or your copyright or your photographs usage to someone. So that's why with the privacy changing so much, that is one reason I've not gone with the online cloud type backup. But there are some good solutions. We looked at them, Backblaze being one of them. And then the second one, Carbonite being the other one. There is also Google Drive, Dropbox. So we talked about all of those in the previous slide. Um, so this is essentially a very simple way to think about your backup strategy. Do you have 3 copies of your photographs? Are there two? Are they stored in at least 2 different media types? And is it at least one of them is offsite? So that's a good way to think about that. Now, going into the next step here, I'm going to talk about what are some 3 or 4 different levels of backup, and how do you go about identifying your level. So what are the 3 different levels of backup? I mean, at the end of the day, what you're trying to decide here is how much am I willing to spend, how frequently am I going to update my stuff, and the final one is how much size do I need. So those are 3 different things to keep in mind. Let's go into the levels of backup. The 3 different levels are quite simply the hobbyist level, professional level, and production level. So what is a So who is the hobbyist targeted towards? Well, the hobbyist is really someone who takes the photographs on a off and on basis. They're not taking the photos on a ongoing basis, and then the size of the photos that they take are typically not in RAW. RAW definitely needs more space, so they are not in RAW. They are mostly in JPEG, and then the size they need is not too much. Then you have a professional. A professional is someone who makes money, quite honestly, with their photos. It could be a small production house, small house rather, with 1 or 2 people, a small studio. That could be just something that they do on a pretty regular basis. They earn money from that, right? So that's the professional level. And then the production level is much more. I'm going to say large scale. A big studio, big clients, and they need some kind of system to which is very robust. They have not just three backups, for instance. Maybe they have 10 different backups. So it's to that level. Let's now jump to a hobbyist, and what would be something that would be a good workflow, good backup plan suited for a hobbyist. So just like I showed you in my workflow here really the person who's a hobbyist is uh, trying to capture the photos, pick up the photos, and store them. And this hobbyist is perhaps the camera that allows for only one SD card, which is fine. They use that one SD card to capture the image. Once they have captured the image, they then have the copies in 2 different hard drives, and kind of similar to what I showed you. The computer edits it. They put the hard drives, replicate the hard drives again. So that is who we are calling a hobbyist. And here, really, anyone who is not earning money, this is the least from a backup perspective that they need to do. If you are in that category that you don't earn money, this is the minimum that you should be doing. At least one SD card, and then at least 2 copies of that those images. And then at the same time, because it's only one SD card, you copy it and format it, and then start using it for your next shoot. So this is the bare minimum that if you take photographs any kind, whether you sell them or not, this is the bare minimum that you should have. Excuse me. So then moving to the professional level, and the professional level is once again someone who does this as part of their livelihood. They earn money, maybe not a full income, but they still earn money. This is where they have a business, so the risk of the impact of losing your photographs is just going to be massive, because you earn your life from those those photos. So that's why it's important to keep them safe. So that's what this professional level is. And in this professional level, we start with a camera that can accept different SD cards. So that's the starting point. You have two different SD cards in your camera all the time if your camera accepts that. And then similar to what we talked about in the previous place, we make sure that we have all of these elements, all of these redundancies built into the workflow. So that is two SD cards, which saves us at the capture, two hard drives, which helps us to post process and then saves back the uh, edited portion. Then you go into the next level, which is making sure that you have network assisted storage, which backs up, mirrors your photographs on more than one, and that's kind of uh, where you have finished your process from a professional level. Now, last thing I would say is, if you are doing that, you need one copy of your photographs that are offsite, not on your location. And what you would do is you would just get those, get that external offsite drive, and you would replicate that, ship it out again, or send it, put it, give it to your friend, to your family to store in an offsite place. So you do that on an ongoing basis. Now the next piece is then the production level. And the production level images or exercise or photo shoot is it's a pretty big production, and you have a full-blown staff as well, full-blown someone who could just dedicatedly look at your data, save your data, and keep it there on an ongoing basis. So that's what we call, what I'm calling production level backup plan. The overall backup plan is same. You still do what we just talked about. You still do have two cards. You still have your external HD hard drives. You have a computer that edits everything. You have one offsite drive. What this means is, once again, it's not in your studio, or it may be at your home, or it may be at your friend's place, wherever, but not in your studio. So here, one other thing that you could do is you could have another hard drive here, which um, which takes the images and creates another copy to your location. If you're out shooting somewhere, that would be something you could do. So we've talked about three different aspects of photography. We've talked about different levels of backing up your photography. Now, really the last portion where I'm going to give you a short assignment. Remember, our goal with this class is not to finish watching the videos, but to go in and do the assignment and finish the assignment. That's our goal here. Um, so now you have the assignment, and your assignment is going to be in the next 48 hours, making sure you have a way to implement what you're learning here today. And from a class perspective, we have about 15 more minutes to go, and I'd like us to get through these slides, and then that'll need to finish your assignment and implement it in your own business. So I've divided this in several different steps. So step number one, the step you need to decide is what level you're going to play. Are you going to go all the way through and have a server, have full-blown backup system, or you're going to do something different? So that's something you need to decide. And how you decide that? Well, you decide that if, for instance, if you're a hobbyist, more on not to earn money, but for your own sake, well, start at the hobbyist level. The hobbyist level up there was pretty bare minimum, just 2 hard drives and your laptop or machine. That itself is fairly minimal. Just buy 2 hard drives and get started. The worst case in this is if you don't buy, you know what can happen. I've talked about that. The goal is if this is too confusing, if it's just too much, start at the hobbies level. That is the bare minimum you should do. Go ahead, buy 2 hard drives. If you have questions about what kind of hard drive to buy and all of that, I will have something with this class that you can download. You should be able to find the recommendations there as well. So then, once you have done that, once you have used that kind of a flow, you have that kind of data backup ready to go. The next thing then to think about is leveling up. And by leveling up, what I mean is if you've moved from taking pictures for yourself to now taking pictures for clients, then you need to upgrade to a professional level. So you need, in that case, hard drives, at least 3, and then a QNAP. That would be a NAS system. So that's how then you could take this to the next level. And that third hard drive needs to go offsite. That needs to be kept offsite. You need to leave it out there. Now, this offsite could be either a home, it could be studio, it could be some other, any place. It could be a friend's location, your family's house, wherever you can find the place. You should keep it out off site from your other main stuff. And I think I already talked about this before, but this is the other part of leveling up. If you are already at a professional level and don't have a NAS, that is something that I would definitely recommend. And really, it's like having your own cloud, and you have your own cloud. You can where you want. You can use it from anywhere you want. If you're at a restaurant and all of a sudden you strike a conversation with someone, uh, and you need to show your pictures. They are right on your system, even if they are not on your website. So that's pretty great feature of network assisted storage. Um, Now let's go into just talking about this whole professional level. What does that mean? Um, Really, the professional level is workflow perspective. If you want to take the next step, and what does that mean from taking that step perspective? If you are at that, you do need to um, uh, go ahead and start doing that. Start taking your business to the production level. Uh, Next step after the professional level. What you need to then think about is you probably have a team already who can do this for you. That's the other thing, is that when you're a hobbyist or you're a professional, you're doing this on your own. At the production level, you have someone who's dedicated to making sure you have a backup, you have a ongoing consistent data, consistent photographs, and you don't lose your photographs. Um, that is the implementation aspect, and we can I'm just going to go through this one more time from assignment perspective. So your goal, once again, in the next 48 hours, decide start. If you don't know what level you're going to start, go ahead and start at the very basic level, which is buy 2 hard drives and start of the data. If you are already at that level, then think about going to the professional level by adding a NAS, adding offsite location. And then that's basically what number 4 there would mean, is buying a NAS and getting ready to be synchronized all across all of your media types. So that really ends the class on backup strategy, backup course, creating your workflows with your course, your plan to make sure that you don't lose your photographs. I mean, if you're a photographer, this is the worst thing that can happen. So why not prepare and protect for your photographs from that? I mean, if you're a painter, think about what would happen if you, I mean, this is serious. So if you've not given this much of a thought so far, this is where you need to step up and you need to start taking action now. That is absolutely, this is one thing that I would not uh, postpone, procrastinate on. So that is that, and thank you for watching the course. Thank you for staying with us. As I said, uh, I am going to send a checklist, an item by item list of all of the things that we talked about. We talked about a whole bunch of different workflow. We talked about my workflow, how I go about photographs. We talked about aspects, several different. All of this is important if you do want to save your life's work. That is all. If you have any questions, remember you can always ask your questions by at neil@learnfoodphotography.com. So once again, that email is, let me actually do that here. And just so it's in the content as well, it is neil at learnfoodphotography.com. Photography.com. Neil@loanphotography.com. All right, so that's how you can reach me. You can ask questions. You can if you have any follow-up questions, jump in and ask those questions, and we will. I'll reply to that. Now, I'm still going to stay online for next few more minutes. In the chat box, you can still type in your questions, and I will answer those questions. Let me see if there are some questions already coming in. Okay, one question we have. Google Drive. Is Google Drive a good backup solution? Jump back to the workflow. And this workflow here, if your question is that if I don't have any of this, and I only have Google Drive, is that a good option? So if that's your question, really there is a need to have these hard disks, external hard drives in place. The reason you need these is that's how you start working. That's where you have your photos stored, and then you have a copy of those photos. If you only want to upload your photos to Google Drive, one, it is a cost that you will pay on an ongoing basis, and two, I'm not 100% sure, as I said in the section, about what this means if they change the privacy. This can happen, but at that point of time, if you have 1 terabyte of data on Google Drive, will you be taking all of that down? How will you store? How will you store that? And all of that is just becomes a um, um, question that does not, that at that point, if they change their privacy, it's a headache that it's one less thing to worry about in my mind at this point. So that's why I have something now. As I said, the NAS system is like your own personal cloud, a cloud server. So it's better to have it that way than relying on a third party and risking that. So let's see if there are more questions. I will keep watching the chat here.